Howdy, partner. What it do, baby boo?
Hello.
My name is Christopher Sabo, also known as Skylar Sabo. I am an anarcho-communist YouTuber, also a Twitch streamer. I'm just starting to dive my toes into Twitch streaming, and uh, I started reading this book because I want to learn about settler colonialism, and I want to eventually work towards dismantling the U.S. empire. Yep.
Hello, friends. Good evening.
Hello. Yo.
Uh, Hi, everybody. I'm Kamazats. I do angry Twitch streams usually, and then on the weekends I try to host a panel discussion called Unidos, focusing on raising marginalized voices within the left. You can find me at twitch.tv/Kamazats_alter. And yeah, that's about it. I do have a YouTube channel, but we don't talk about that. We're okay.
What? Hey, I'm Damon, and yeah, I also stream on Twitch, twitch.tv/whoisdamon, and also on YouTube/Damon Garcia. And I talk a lot about liberation theology and leftist stuff. And I'm excited to be here.
Hello, I am Surplus Cornbread. I am a nobody on Twitter. Uh, and I'm a Marxist who loves talking Marxist stuff when I get the chance. He, him pronouns.
Oh, yeah, he, him.
They, she.
Mm, Dead man should be coming, but we'll be late. Mm-hmm.
Probably right. That would make the most sense. Oh, by the way, just so I know, this is on your YouTube, right, Simba? Okay, cool.
All right, so I was muted on stream.
Oh, no.
Which is
Oh
awesome.
no.
It's all good, but now I'm not. Michaela, thank you very much for the tip. Hopefully, people can tell me like how audio is and everything. But yeah, Brianna's in chat. Hello, Brianna. Mailbox Spiders, what's up, dude? Cornbread, of course, you're right here. And Michaela, thank you.
Okay, I'm tweeting it out right now.
Dope.
All right, yeah.
Cool. So in the last chapter, The Heart of Whiteness, what did we go over? I guess the very first sentence of the chapter, the key to understanding America is to see that it was a chain of European settler colonies that expanded into a settler empire. That's like basically the chapter. Like it's like America was not founded on through peaceful means, I guess you could say. And what did everybody take away from the last chapter?
So, my big takeaways were the social and class structure of settler society in particular, how they were deeply based in a more bourgeois sort of conception of class and relationships to production.
Cool. Yeah, and with that, the land question was a big deal. Anybody else want to comment on like what the last chapter was about, or like what?
I
Yeah,
like-
like
Go ahead.
yeah, like it's like as if like a white worker was able to was able to work one day, and like he was able to make enough money to buy like a few acres of land a day, and that's what constitutes, essentially that's what constitutes like a bourgeoisie, a bourgeois settler,
Yeah, and I like that he was able to open up the whole thing by talking about how this isn't about white history we already know, and now we need just an additional history of people of color, but we need to retell white history because the white history we've been given was always a lie. And I really like the whole book. Just very much feels like, let me just tell you this story as if you've never heard it, instead of just assuming you know things and then attaching stuff to it. And so I very much appreciate like that narrative style so far.
Yeah, I think definitely. Yeah, he definitely like kind of gets at the fact that if like history is truly written by the victor in this case is a bunch of settlers. Pardon my dogs, by the way. We're gonna just have to like live with that, I guess. But
It's all good.
the victors are settlers, and the settlers are really nice to themselves about like their history colonizing the United States. So there was also like this. He attacks the settler myth in the first chapter that there was slavery, but only like people in the South like really had slaves, and it wasn't really a big deal. Like all of the other people were just poor people looking for a decent life. And first off, most of the people who came to the United States were not proletarian, because proletarianization didn't really exist throughout all of Europe at the time. And second, if you weren't a slave owner or like somebody who was like directly related to a slave owner, then you still might have like made boats, and the boats might have like gone through the transatlantic slave trade. Like you benefited from that. Or you might make clothes, and those clothes might be used to clothe slaves, and you would benefit in that way, So he just kind of like takes all of those kinds of myths and says like, no, actually this is a settler colony, and like you've got the indigenous people who were displaced and the people who were brought here against their will, and there's no way to get around that the entire colony is responsible for that. Yeah. And he does not pull any punches, like trying to explain that and shit. So now we've got chapter 2, Struggles and Alliances, and the theme throughout chapter 2, I think, is tactical unity, and the ways that colonized people use tactical unity in situations of struggle, especially the major 2 or 3 here. I think he talks about Sir Francis Bacon. Was it Francis or Frederick?
Nathaniel Bacon.
Amazing.
Yeah, at the very beginning, he focuses very much on the story about Nathaniel Bacon with like it was like how like the blacks and the whites were like uniting together to like free themselves and like even like one part right here where it says Herbert Aptheker, the Communist Party USA expert on Africans, has no hesitation in pointing out in this rebellion as a wonderful heroic example to us all. He clearly loves this case of early anti-capitalist uprising to whites and blacks. I was just quoting it right there. So so even communist even the Communist Party USA has used Nathaniel Bacon as an example to this. I mean, and of course, the Communist Party of USA is known for being problematic, as we know.
Yes, absolutely, and I think it's really important to emphasize that Herbert Aptheker, a settler leftist who was in the CPUSA, wrote a book called American Negro Slave Revolts that was actually required reading to become a Black Panther. Like, you had to read this book.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Yes, really, and I actually like it. I have it. It's called Negro Slave Revolts, and this part is in it. So I actually liked Herbert Aptheker before I read this chapter. He also quotes Philip Foner, who I have another book by him over there. And he takes like settler leftist history and says like, okay, I get what you were saying, but like you're just wrong. You are incorrect about history because of you failed to consider your settler status. You know what I mean?
I see what you mean.
Yeah. So throughout chapter 2, talking about the Bacon Rebellion, Sakai kind of goes on to like take these different historians who are all settlers and explain like, no, you didn't have the full perspective. So for example, in the case of Francis Bacon, for anybody who is, or Nathaniel Bacon, for anybody who is not familiar, I'm sure somebody's gonna clip me like saying, was it Frederick or Francis? And then like, no, it's Nathaniel. But basically, Bacon's Rebellion was a situation where you had the English government representative who was like, he was kind of like the liberal in the situation, saying like, okay, we have all these territories, throughout Virginia up to like Maryland, I think they were talking about. And as of now, we don't want to expand too much because we've already like kind of aggravated the Native Americans to the west of us, but we've made peace and we have all these peace treaties, so we should just chill. And Bacon wants to not only seize more territory, but also murder all of the Native Americans. And then the English government's like, no, we can't murder them all. We have to enslave at least some. And Bacon is like, fuck no. Like, we need to remove them all and seize their land. And in the process of doing this, Bacon actually runs out kind of popular support from like the white small planter class. So he grabs a bunch of indentured servants who are some are white, some are black, and slaves who obviously are all black. And he has this coalition to go and kill a whole bunch of Native Americans. And eventually the rebellion is put down, but a lot of historians, even the communist ones, said that this was an example of unity among black and white people in history, when the thing that they're united to do is be settlers and seize more land. So that's kind of what we're talking about, to give y'all a little bit of context.
To characterize Nathaniel Bacon, I see Nathaniel Bacon as like some sort of like accelerationist, like I don't know, like and even Governor Berkeley, like I wouldn't justify Governor Berkeley as like some sort of like liberal hero, like either, but like because like Governor Berkeley didn't like have like any like sympathy towards like Native Americans either, but like at least Governor Berkeley wanted to stop Nathaniel Bacon from killing all the Native Americans, like because like at least Governor Berkeley like didn't see the necessary means of like killing like Native Americans to begin with, because like it wasn't profitable, it wasn't necessary. But like I'm not saying it was justified. I'm not saying he was justified. I'm just saying like Governor Berkeley just like I'm just going based on what I've read, you know.
Okay, so when I said liberal, I didn't literally mean liberal. I was kind of quoting Sakai in this chapter. He says, but Berkeley believed in the usefulness of keeping some Indian subjects. As he said, quote, I would have preserved those Indians that I knew were hourly at our mercy to have been our spies and intelligence to find the more bloody enemies. Bacon disagreed, scorning all this as too meek, too soft, almost treasonous. He believed in the wiping out of all Indians, including allied and subject Indians. As he put in his manifesto, our design was to ruin and extirpate all Indians in general. Thus did Bacon's rebellion define its main program. This was a classic settler, liberal, conservative debate, which still echoes in our times, like that between Kennedy versus Wallace, OEO versus KKK, CIA versus FBI, and so on.
And to expand on that, like one of the interesting and quote-unquote fun little facts dropped here is that Bacon actually didn't kill any Indians who were from enemy tribes. Like his big victory was where he got to have a tribe who was, in the theme of this chapter, tactically allied to the settlers, to attack the Susquehanna, who had been doing raids, and then Bacon turns around, demands all of the loot that the allied tribe had gotten, and then wipes them out when they give even the slightest bit of resistance to it. And so when he comes back from his great victory against the Native Americans, his victory is against allied tribes.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't put it better. His policy was super cutthroat against Indians. And sorry, Damon, were you gonna say something?
I was say I did like this idea of this is like a precursor between liberal and conservative, because both of those sides want to dominate over marginalized people. And it seems like the conservative side has always just been more blatantly honest about it and move quickly toward final solution type things. And the liberal side just finds a way to make marginalized people useful. And so that seems to be what's going on in this situation, and just what has always gone on. But both want to dominate over. And so, yeah, and it's interesting too to even think of, kind of compare Berkeley to liberal arguments I think of today, like, and hearing him say like we have to be able to build these alliances with different Indian communities because they're beneficial in this way or that way. It like reminded me a bit of liberal pro-immigration arguments, which is just like we have to let more immigrants in because it will help our economy. And so that's why they're a benefit, and that's why they're so great, because they'll be a benefit to our economy. Where it's like both sides are still dominating or just using marginalized people.
And to expand on that, notice how Berkeley talks about how he wants to use the quote-unquote subject groups, and that is against other less compliant tribes. So in this instance, we're seeing how, from the settler perspective, this tactical alliance is a mechanism of dividing resistance to them. And anytime they're giving an inch to these groups that they're worried about, that they are oppressing, it's in order to have one oppressed group just go deal with the other oppressed group for the settler.
You know, I'll be very honest with you. I read this chapter twice, and once by myself, and once in audiobook form, and I did not pick up on the fact that General Berkeley was trying to do that to the indigenous folks twice. I did not do that, and so now that you guys are putting it that way, I can see where you guys are coming from. So I'll have to reread it again from that perspective. Thank you for putting it that way. It's
Yeah,
good that
no-
we're having this discussion.
Yeah, no big deal. I mean, like, the point of having a discussion is to clarify everything, and it's really easy to, like, lose track of details and shit. I understand. We're all
Yeah.
here to, like, learn and improve. It's all good.
Yeah, for sure.
In any case, yeah, it's like the any kind of unity that indigenous folks have with the English, even, like, is, like, definitely, like, there to benefit the English. And hang on, I need to find, like, this one part. And somebody, like, while I'm looking for it, please talk over me.
Well, so just to get started with some of these discussion questions that we had sort of set up. So what did the colonized proletariat achieve through tactical unity and exploiting contradictions between settlers in this chapter? Anyone want to start tackling that?
I feel like
Yeah,
we may need to go over the second half of the chapter before where we talk about the war for independence and how that
yeah.
the
Yeah, that's a good
retelling of
point,
that history.
actually.
Mhm.
All right. Well, I guess for the listener, just be keeping that thought in mind as we go through the second part. Did you find it?
I kind of have, yeah. So, basically, like, the English, the English's long-term strategy was to make alliances with indigenous groups, societies, civilizations, however you would put it, to make fur trade easier. So, throughout the whole situation, like the English made this had this pattern of behavior where they encroached on indigenous land and then stopped if they could, like, trade things through there, and also, like, if like, so that they could, how do I put this? They encroached on territory, stopped doing that so that, like, they could make alliances with indigenous folks in tactical locations so that they can make trade routes, and subsequently, like, enslave those Indians, basically, like, economically make them dependent, which was never fully successful, and we'll get into, like, why indigenous folks were never, like, actually in chattel slavery in the future. But yeah, all of the unity and stuff was just, like, for the indigenous folks, it was like, hey, stop killing us, and for the English, they benefited economically. So any kind of unity was made to benefit them, basically. Was all I was trying to say.
Yeah, I was like really interested also in seeing the looking at this differently for the independence from the British. Like, we're usually taught about it as like Americans gaining freedom from this tyrannical control of England so they could be free and autonomous. And in reality, it was because the British were claiming Indian lands that the Euro-American settlers wanted. So it was like trying to get rid of a big part of their competition. And I really like this quote here where he said, like Bacon's rebellion, the quote liberty that the American revolutionists of the 1770s fought for was in large part the freedom to conquer new Indian lands and profit from the commerce of the slave trade without any restrictions or limitations. In other words, the bourgeois quote freedom to oppress and exploit others. The successful future of the settler capitalists demanded the scope of independent nationhood. Yeah. All right. And I was also like, it was new for me in learning how many African slaves were on the side of the British because they wanted to destroy America, and so they and that's the only reason, not because they had British pride, but because they're trying to end their own oppression there. And I hadn't heard that much before.
Right.
Yeah.
It's really telling that in the first, like, giant confrontation that America had, like, colonial America had, which was versus the British, more than, like, well more than, like, 60% of slaves chose the side of the English. And that happened because, and we still haven't summarized, I guess, in the second half of the chapter, Sakai talks about how basically the United States economic I guess not the United States at the time. The colonies' economic expansion was like so massive, and they have built a population so big that the British kind of wanted to like clip the wings of colonial America. They wanted it to like not get so big that eventually it would have the power to either overthrow or like have power over the British, because it's like their colony, you know. And so this causes tension up until there was actually like an economic crisis or whatever, and that's when the settler Revolutionary War happens, in which the British actually, before the Americans, said, hey, any of you guys, any of you slaves, like if you fight for us, you're gonna get freedom. And so like a ridiculous number of slaves fought for the British, and it was only at the point where they couldn't recruit more people to the militia that the Americans decided, okay, fine, like we can have slaves within our ranks and stuff. And one of the reasons that settlers didn't really want to join the war was because like they came there for the economic opportunities, right? If they're there for the economic opportunities and most of them have land, they're probably not going to want to like die and give up their land because it'll get settled by somebody else. So sometimes even, I think it was in, I forgot. It might have been like Pennsylvania or something, somewhere in New England. If you got chosen to like join the militia, drafted, I guess you could say, you could just send your slaves instead. So a lot of them just did that. But, thankfully many of them escaped and stuff. It's still not known how many slaves fought on the side of the British, but it's some ridiculously high number. So that's the
Yeah.
context that we're
Also,
talking about.
settlers only enlisted for short enlistments of like 90 days, while
That too.
slaves would fight until they died or to the end.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But during the... Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think we're starting to blend the beginning of chapter 3 in with chapter 2, but I think which is fine, whatever. But I would say that the best way to kind of summarize this overall is just like this basically sets the precursor of how the white proletariat from the settler class will usually exploit either the natives or the African or the Africans to fight their battles for them, or use them to bolster their own ranks. And this chapter really sets up like, hey, you're going to be seeing this a lot, where we're because later on he'll talk about like the Chinese and the Mexicans and everything like that.
Right.
So it's like that this is like chapter 2 kind of goes into like that whole primer of like, this is why it's hard for us to work with or have faith in the white working class and having our best interests, because every time we do, we end up getting fucking stabbed in the back. So
yeah, actually, there's an interesting study that what's his name, Lowell, the guy who wrote Lies My Teacher Told Me. He goes over this interesting study where basically like during the Vietnam War, the more wealthy you were, the more likely you were to be pro-war, and it's like almost a one-to-one relationship. And so black people were almost universally against the Vietnam War. And that like kind of has its roots all the way back in the Revolutionary War, which I thought was really cool. Lies My Teacher Taught Me, great book as well, if you want to check that out.
And I think it's an interesting contrast to how this is taught in schools, because I do remember hearing, like, back in high school or something like that, learning about, oh, here were the African Americans who fought in the Revolutionary War. And for one thing, while they mention that, oh, yes, there are these guys on both sides, they don't mention the disparity. In the chat, mailbox spiders got the quote 65,000 Africans joined the British forces, over 10 for every one enlisted in the continental US ranks.
Mm-hmm.
And they also try and frame the ones who fought for the United States as doing so in some ways as if they uh, were embracing American ideals, uh, whereas, as Sakai is pointing out in this chapter, they're doing it in part because they're kind of forced, but also because they're getting offered liberty out of this.
Mhm.
And then the settlers go ahead and betray a number of those folks who were promised freedom if they fought, but then were just sent back into slavery at the end of the war, anyways.
Mhm. Right, and obviously it wouldn't be for a very long time that any real notion of freedom would come up again for new African folks. And something that I do want us to think about is that, like, if black people, any number of them, were free in this situation, that wouldn't make their lives much better, especially because at this point, if you're not a slave, it's still legal to enslave you. Like, if you're a white person and you catch somebody like a black person who is not a slave, depending on the state you're in, you could, like, there are situations where you could just, like, enslave them again. And I mean, what's worse is that, like, if you're free in this kind of society, you would still have to work for a white person at the very least, as a working class person, which probably wouldn't be very, very nice. So what I guess what I'm trying to get at is that self-determination is never on the table. While the Brits maybe will say that you're free in some nominal sense, and you know, like, maybe some number of generals in the military freed their slaves, I don't know, but that kind of freedom isn't as meaningful as self-determination, the right to control your own life and associate with whoever you want to. That never comes up. Cornbread?
Oh, okay, so, sorry, it was the lag on video, I thought you were still talking. One point to remember, I don't think it was from this work, from another one that talked about what happened with a lot of the folks who the British liberated is, while some of them were recaptured by Americans, the British, in part just out of the spite of not wanting to help the rebel settlers, did let the Africans generally move to either, like, parts of Canada, or a lot went down to Jamaica. And there, you're still under, like, British rule, but you're not enslaved, and that tactical unity with the British did actually kind of work out for a number of those who did achieve their freedom from that way, or got to their lines. And here, I think, is just one of those examples where you can see that it is possible to sort of play the colonizers and rulers kind of off each other when they have these divisions. So you have this tactical unity where you side with the side that has the least interest in directly exploiting you personally. Oftentimes that means going against the what you call nation of that you are assigned to.
Gotcha. Okay, so I guess this is a good time to talk about the first discussion question. What did the colonized working class achieve through tactical unity?
They got theirs.
Okay, true.
That's basically about it. I mean, the thing, like the history lesson in this chapter really kind of pisses me off, because it just shows, like, that you know, like, so this is held up as, like, one of, like, the event that it focuses on is held up as, like, one of, like, the best examples of tactical unity between between the working class, between like African slaves and the colonized worker, even Native American slaves and stuff like that. Like it shows that. And then like at the end, basically the only people that come out on top are the settlers, right? The white guys who wanted to be treated like other white people, and so like the only thing that I could say is that like, hey, they got theirs, and then once again, it allows the history books to be recorded as um, people working together to overthrow unjust oppression, leading to worker solidarity and blah 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 blah. When in actuality, it's just this repetitive history that we constantly see, where it's just like we or marginalized people are only useful insofar as it can lead to a settler victory.
Right, yeah. And that theme comes up a whole lot in like I think I'm at like chapter 9 or something when he's talking about World War II. And I don't want to get there yet, but yeah, that comes up a whole bunch.
Yeah, it's also enraging to read about the part about Captain Mark Starlin, who was given all these honors, and then after the war, was reclaimed as a slave and spent the rest of his life as a slave, and is today historians talk about him as a patriot, super loyal to the new settler nation, and so that and that's something to think about too. Like every African patriot that we may have read about that needs to be.
I think you're cutting out.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, if you could just.
I was saying,
real quick.
just the lie of when we hear about or are taught about these African soldiers and taught about them as these patriots. We have to be aware of that lie and understand that they were made slaves once again right after.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's kind of sad how like if you dive into like history, you can talk like colonial history. You can talk about all these like very impressive black folk that fought for whichever side they fought for and did all these amazing things. But like at the end of the day, they could have ended up just like Mark Starlin, becoming slaves again. So to that extent, I think the colonized proletariat didn't really gain anything because nothing on the table was like for them.
Yeah.
The reason I'm not voting in this upcoming election is because like I don't have a horse in that race, like nothing is at stake for me. Like it's going to be one rapist or another rapist, like in this situation it's just like one group of rich white assholes or another group of rich white assholes for them. Neither is offering self-determination really.
My bad. I misunderstood the question.
Well,
yeah, but anyway, I either way, y'all know what I was talking about.
Yeah, we all know what you were talking about. It's all good.
Well,
So
oh, sorry.
go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Okay, just real quick. Like one thing that I think is also notable about this is that I think a clear clear reading of where the numbers were going on this also kind of gives lie to the idea that these oppressed or colonized people, oh, or just enslaved people, didn't know which side there was more likely to be buttered even a little bit on, because one thing that's notable here is that division in where people go to. Like the American colonizers offered independence, liberty to those slaves who fought through the war, and it was a lot of the time just a total sham. But a whole lot more went with the people in the home country on the basis that since they were not the direct settlers, there's a better shot with them, and that wasn't necessarily wrong. They had a better shot of getting out that way. So I think there's a way in which Sakai's also showing that despite the fact that these are folks who are deliberately denied educations, they're also very clever and very careful in noting what the society that is oppressing them is really like, and who you can't really trust any of them, of course, but who at least you have the better shot.
Yeah.
And and when it comes to the settlers, like they have no regulation on like controlling like their own exploitation of the marginalized. Like so, for example, like as I was mentioning, the conflict between uh, Nathaniel Bacon Jr. and Governor Berkeley. Governor Berkeley had throughout the chapter talked has tried to make some reforms to try to put Nathaniel Bacon into jail a couple times, and then Nathaniel Bacon like had entire militias break him out of jail, and there were like riots to get him out of jail, and and I think if I recall correctly, if like basically like the militias were pretty much well armed and violent to the point to where to the point to where it essentially overthrew the entire town. So I mean like the reforms essentially were useless. So they continue like Nathaniel's reign of terror, like the Tyrian class that he exploited all throughout his reign.
Mm-hmm. There's actually like a kind of funny part that where Jay Sakai like totally just destroys Philip Foner, who I have he wrote or edited the Black Panther Speak, and fucking Jay Sakai says that he refers to Act 7, yeah. Always singled out for praise by Euro-American historians was Act 7 of the Assembly referring to the assembly Nathaniel Bacon had to like do so-called democratic reforms. Was Act 7 of the Assembly, which restored voting rights to propertyless freemen. The most eminent Euro-American radical labor historian Philip S. Foner wrote below, and he says like there was a bunch of praise and stuff, and Philip Foner is like, oh, Act 7 was pretty cool, and then Jay Sakai follows up by saying, it is easy to see how contemptible these pseudo-Marxist white supremacist lies are. And
Yeah.
and he goes on to say like, okay, Act 7 was like a so-called democratic reform, but every single act before that was about the like just making it easier to kill Native Americans. So how could you call that democratic if it's reliant on this group of people not existing,
Yeah, that made me, and reading those parts made me think of we hear the whitewashing of history, making it seem like nothing was all that bad, but then there's this white liberal whitewashing of history, which is to fantasize this fictional small stream throughout white supremacist settler history of good whites who always saw African slaves as equal, who were always trying to fight for their freedom during the entire history of slavery, and then eventually those good whites won. Like that seems to be another form of whitewashing.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the next discussion question?
That was, what could not possibly be achieved through tactical unity?
Self-determination. Next.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
For sure.
Self-respect.
Self-respect was not on the table. That is for sure.
Yeah.
I wasn't. I was kidding, by the way. You guys, if you have any comments, please feel free.
I think it kind of came up with a lot of the discussions on the first question, actually.
Yeah, it did actually. You're right.
But this does lead into question 3. Is tactical unity with the settlers a dead end?
I mean, it doesn't. It doesn't have to be. You know what I mean? Like, I'm assuming that we're talking about it more in modern times, right? Not necessarily, in the
with, like,
historical sense,
the
right?
settler
Okay.
class of people. Just
Yeah. So I would say that with the advent of the information age, people are more knowledgeable, right? There's no like there's the gap has closed, like the intellectual gap has closed significantly, and there are more people that are also, or like younger people as well, are more willing to work with people who are different than them. So and people who just don't, who the good settlers, I guess, if you will, like, where like they just don't, where they want to do their best and they're always willing to go the extra mile, but they don't quite understand quite really like why they're not being trusted, sort of thing. I would say that there are a lot of those types individuals out there. So is it useless to work with them in the end of things? I would say no, uh, or at least not completely. I think that it's important that we reach out to people like that, individuals or groups of individuals that are in that mindset, to try to awaken them to their settler identity, so that they can start like breaking it down within like breaking it down internally, because
You cut out.
that out. Hold up.
I can hear you.
Yeah, you're good now.
Okay. I guess, yeah, like the basically, like, it's 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I would have probably would have been like, fuck yeah, there's no way. Like, we're not there yet. But I feel like nowadays, with how much, cultural immigration there is, there's, not saying that hey, racism is gone, like, not, obviously I'm not saying that, but like, I just feel like people are more willing nowadays to work together, but we need to be more diligent in with like standing our ground for our goals, so that we don't get steamrolled, so we don't get taken advantage of, as we accomplish these things.
Yeah. I want to say too, it feels like there's a different answer if the question is tactical unity with white liberals. It feels like that probably is more of a dead end than it is with the white leftists, and it seems way more of a risk to get steamrolled. So, and I mean unity on like social justice issues, or like if it's an organization that seems to be led by white liberals.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Personally, it seems like it's a dead end.
So, as one of the settlers on this discussion, let me take the more hard line stance here.
Okay.
So, I think one thing that is often misunderstood about Kai's argument from those who haven't really read him is the idea that it's an idealist argument, as in
Right.
it's kind of argument that is based off of, oh, well, we have these categories that are in our mind, and once we break down the categories in our minds, then we can advance. But that's not really what we see in all these arguments that he's shown so far. And spoiler, that he shows later. It is that there is a set of material interests that are driving settlers in what they wind up believing in, what they wind up being willing to do. So, in this regard, the thing is that the dream of being a settler is a pretty sweet deal for the settler. The settler here gets to exploit land and labor from other people to make their own lives easier. They get to have an empire, basically, that they're ruling over. And so the way that you would be able to fundamentally get settlers to switch sides would be to undermine the ability of that deal to work out for them. So if it becomes an impossibility, for instance, for uh, a settler to own a nice plot of land and maybe live off the exploited labor of colonized people, then the settler themselves would have to exploit each other, uh, which is where you would begin to get rifts and where you would begin to potentially break down on a material basis why people get attracted to settler lifestyles and settler ideologies. And pretty much to do that, you have to make colonized people unexploitable, and to do that, you have to make them ungovernable. And for that, you're going to have to offend a lot of settler norms, settler beliefs, making tactical unity potentially in limited circumstances useful, emphasizing the tactical part, but as a long-term strategy insufficient.
Yes. I think an easier way to kind of frame this for people who might be watching this in the future, just because I like people that I or individuals that I've spoken to like offline about this book, especially with leftists, like settler goals with bourgeois goals, that might help you a little bit more, where it's just kind of like this idea that like, oh, I can own a plot of land, as well as it can now be replaced with, well, as long as I'm able to go to a job every day, and pay my bills and have a little extra income on the side so I can take my family out on a nice trip once a year, like that, the idea of the middle class, like as long as they can hold like that petite bourgeois middle class identity, they're willing, like that's as far as they're willing to go. And I think that that seeps into the mindset of like colonized descendants, or like like you look at I mean, you see that all the time, right? Where it's just, whether it's people getting invested into fucking A, like aesthetic cultures, like hip hop culture or something like that, or becoming sneakerheads, or getting wrapped up in spending money on frivolous things, and that's all they want to work for. That's all they want. That's the highest that they feel like they can achieve. It's We have to crush that in ourselves, as well as try to get rid of that in colonizer settler descendants too. So we're all fucked. So we got to figure out. We got to. And
I know
I'm
I'm guilty of that.
yeah, I mean, I honestly think that that's one of the that's one of the reasons why I think that like reading this book and reading Open Veins is like they work so well together, is because they really frame that, especially for people who might be mixed, or might be just like fifth or sixth generation immigrants, seventh generation from the slave trade, just like truly understanding what, like the real history of what their people had and how it was ripped from them, and knowing that you can get it back. You just have to be willing to stand your ground, and you have to be willing to upset people. You can't play you can't cater to everyone's feelings when you're fighting for your own autonomy, right? You're your own, at least just being recognized as a legitimate person or like a legitimate group of people, so that you have equal rights in the same way that everybody else supposedly does.
Yeah. I also think that white people need to understand people of color's kind of uneasiness with working with them, because we are aware that this is something that like people like us have always been fighting for, and this is our only option. But white people always have the option of just falling back on to their settler identity. We can't just fall back on any settler identity. We are colonized and only colonized. And that's why I really liked the line from this chapter where he said, "Nothing raises more enthusiasm among Euro American settlers than attacking people of color. They embrace it as something between a team sport and a national religion." And that seems something
yeah.
that's true.
Yep.
Yeah, that's fucking true. Yeah.
That's true historically and today. Like I've seen
Yeah.
that today. It also reminded me of I have a white friend that said at his work, at a grocery store, there was somebody of color that was just acting weird and causing a disturbance, and this white guy looked at him and gave him this nod, and my friend called it the white guy nod. He's like, I've seen it a couple times throughout my life. A white guy will give me this nod, like, yeah, those freaking people of color, like us whites are way better than these pieces of shit. And so and I was like, I never heard of this. He's like, yeah, it's the white guy nod that I see a lot. So, and he's like, whenever someone does to me, I feel uncomfortable. Like I want to be like, no, I'm not like you. But it seems like even when a white person is able to dismantle these settler tendencies and be able to be more of a comrade to people, always have the ability to just go right back whenever they would like to settler, and being able to take advantage of those privileges. And so I think that's why people need to understand, that's why there also is some uneasiness and hesitation, because we know that at any point you can just become a traitor.
Yeah, there's I think that we mentioned the Blue Eyes experiment by Jane Elliott last time, which basically is like this woman, her name is Jane Elliott, will take like a whole bunch of people, and instead of sorting by skin color, she'll sort by eye color, and basically people with blue eyes are put in the center of the room and are put in like a social situation in this social experiment where they basically like don't have agency over what goes on or how people talk about them, and it's like really really uncomforting. It's like made people cry and stuff. And in this one video that I think Deadman Animations has on his channel, like this woman with blue eyes like just literally cannot take it, and she runs out of the room, and Jane Elliott catches up with her, and she's like, "Hey, what's going on?" And she explains like how uncomfortable everything made her feel and stuff, and that she's like ready to come back in. And Jane Elliott's like, "Okay, you can come back in, but you have to apologize to absolutely everybody in the room, because you just like expressed your privilege as a white person to like leave the situation that you were uncomfortable with, where everybody who's black in there does not have the chance, like no opportunity to change what color skin they are. So like you have to, you know, you're welcome if you're able to like do that." And she was not, you know, she cried even more and then laughed. But yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah.
But yes, I did also want to quote chapter 4, getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. I know I've had this like up on stream for a little bit, but Sakai says in chapter 4, the white workers literally demanded their traditional right to be petit bourgeois, petty imitators who would annex their small individual plots each time the real bourgeois annexed another oppressed nation. It should be clear that the backwardness of white labor is not a matter of racism or mistaken ideas or of being tricked by the capitalists, all idealistic instead of materialist formations. Rather, it is a class question and a national question. So I think that that's probably the most controversial, or one of the most controversial points that Sakai continually brings up, that there is like a materialist reason why settlers behave the way they do, that Cornbread was talking about, and that gets into a whole bunch of criticism. I think Surplus Cornbread, did you want to talk about any criticism of this book, or?
Yeah, sure. So when I've seen criticism of settlers, it fundamentally comes back to a lot of that, or that Jay Sakai is in some ways not Marxist. And this is typically the sort of thing you'll hear out of a Marxist circle. You're not going to hear a liberal go, oh, well, this is idealist and all that. So where this argument seems to come from is this idea that because race is a social construct, which is true, and Sakai certainly is not denying that it therefore only exists within people's minds and does not have a material effect. So therefore, when you talk about white versus black, you are making some sort of category error in this, where Sakai's actually going through very carefully showing how this is not actually a category error, that the social construct of race created separate classes within the settler colony itself, created classes that are more exploited versus those who have at least the opportunity to become exploiters. And this grounds it in an analysis which is familiar to someone who is conversant in Marx. It's familiar in materialism. And so that's my response to that sort of critique.
Gotcha. Word. Good stuff. What is the next discussion question?
How has the interesting one, given what you and
You cut out a little bit.
started?
The question was, how was the land question developed, or how has
Right,
the
yeah.
land question developed?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, that's kind of an open-ended question, actually. So, I mean, like, can you maybe give a more specific question based on that? Like maybe what has land what is settlers what's the purpose of land serve in settler colonialism? I don't know.
I think that
I
one
guess
way
I
of
just don't
viewing the-
remember.
I
I
don't
don't
know.
remember I don't remember the land question.
Yeah, the land
Yeah,
question didn't
what
really.
was the land question?
The land question didn't really come up that much in this chapter. Basically, just how the last chapter was about the actual settlement of the United States, or I guess not colonial America, and this is more so about tactical unity. So there isn't that much of a change in the role of land throughout the chapter. The one thing that maybe you could say changed was the whole Nathaniel Bacon Act Number 7 thing, where he's looked upon as a hero because he gave landless people, landless settlers, I should say, the right to vote, or wanted to do that, and then was defeated. But other than that,
Wait,
I don't.
sorry.
Other than that, I don't really think that land came up that much, unless anybody has anything else to say.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Just real quick, it came up in the part about where the American settlers decided to gain independence because they were being restricted by the British Crown on expanding their land holdings further west. This was in how Sakai talks about it. The sort of breaking point where the settlers decided they could no longer stay with the British and had to go independent.
True. Yeah.
By the way, Deadman, if you're talking, I can't hear you.
That was Deadman?
Oh no, I'm not talking. I'm just listening. Yeah, I kept coming back in and out because my phone kept dying.
Oh. What's up? good to have you finally, though.
Yeah, thanks.
But yeah, definitely. The fact that these settlers came to America, and then wanted to develop westward a whole bunch, and they their economy was so big that Great Britain basically wanted to say no, you're gonna stay confined to that because we want to be the economic hegemon, and then they got into a war over that. Is just it's mind blowing. I guess I mean it is that being a settler is a petite bourgeois annexationist kind of idea, and that's what Sakai is trying to get at there.
Also, just the reality of capitalism is imperialism. Once they had the means to do their own thing, the settler project became an impediment to their own economic interests.
Yeah, definitely. Did anybody else want to say anything about how the land question developed? Or go ahead.
I bet the war probably made lots of money actually. Like the war itself was probably very profitable. Like the Revolutionary War was probably very profitable.
It probably was. I don't know. Is that ever written about though?
I don't remember it being covered in the book actually, but I wonder if it was. I mean, you got to imagine, the fact of the matter that that a lot of slaves were used in the Revolutionary War, and if the slaves were being sold and in fact actually I think it was even covered in chapter. Actually, it was covered in chapter 1 that the slaves were sent off were sent off to war, and they were promised to come back freed, and
You cut out.
so yeah. I'm sorry I'm around, but I'm just something that crossed my mind. So I don't know. It's just something that it was really interesting to me.
Definitely, you're good. All right.
I mean, I don't really have anything to add about the land question or anything like that. But if I could change gears here, unless you had something, unless there's another question.
No, go ahead. Feel free.
Oh, okay. I guess one of the things that kind of comes up in this chapter is you see a lot of solidarity between the slave population, the African slave population, and the indigenous population. Just really working together, finding solidarity with each other, and that's another trend that you see a lot going forward through this book, is that the Africans that are even after they become freed or anything like that, they end up having to the only people that they can really trust to have their best interests at heart, or that can take, or that they can trust, I guess, is the First Nations people, or the different indigenous nations throughout the country, and and it's this idea of true revolutionary attitude, because even during the Haitian rebellion, he mentions about how Haiti offered when during the Haitian revolt, Haiti offered citizenship and safety to any Native American people to come to Haiti, and then also of course any former slave that manages to escape, they can become free in Haiti. But because of that, solidarity between the two of them, you see like the people like Andrew Jackson coming in and absolutely trying everything they can to divide this wedge, or to add a wedge into these two groups working together, because and just being an overall thorn in the side of the settler class expanding across the United States. So so this, as much as this chapter kind of sets up that like like, hey, it's really anytime throughout history that marginalized people kind of trust the ruling class or the settler class to have their backs and work with them, they usually get let down. But then you see the historical evidence of marginalized people working together and coordinating together, and forcing resources out of the settler class in order to stop the potential uprising of those marginalized people. So I think that's something that I really liked about this chapter, is because like it laid that groundwork, or it started framing that message in this chapter as well.
So yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think there's a good way of contrasting the sorts of unity that, like, Native peoples and New African people have, as opposed to the tactical unity. And that contrast is, I think, one of the important parts of this chapter. That if you go for the tactical unity, it is always at best temporary and always of high probability of betrayal by the settler groups. But when there are these fundamentally aligned interests, where both Native peoples and New Africans have the interests of not getting exploited or exterminated by the settler, and much more long-lasting sort of unity.
Word. All right. Go ahead.
Before we move on, I kind of want to reiterate my point from earlier, if it's all right with you, before we move on, because actually what I said was in the chapter, was in chapter 2, and actually there is a paragraph I want to read that further proves my point. It says here, even those who allied with the victorious settlers did not necessarily find themselves winning anything. Many Africans were disarmed and put back in chains at the war's end, despite solemn settlers' promises. John Hancock, president of the Continental Congress, may have presented African U.S. troops the banner which had praised them as bucks of America, but that didn't help Africans such as Mark Starlin. He was the first African captain in the American naval forces, and had won many honors for his near suicidal nights raids on the British fleet, which is why the settlers let him and his all African crew sail alone. But as soon as the war ended, his master simply reclaimed him. Starlin spent the rest of his life as a slave. He, ironically enough, is known to historians as an exceptionally dedicated quote patriot, super loyal to the new settler nation. And I mean that's exactly like what what you folks are talking about. Like that's what you guys are talking about. He's considered a hero to the settlers, and yet here he is, like he literally spent the rest of his life as a slave. Like exactly. Like and yet, and like he literally served. He was literally like a captain of like a fleet. Like
and yet he was like a slave. Like, what in the world is going on?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's that whole idea of like, I want to say like no good deed goes unpunished, but I mean like maintaining the found, or like being part of the mortar and the foundation of the United States empire. I don't know if that's necessarily a good deed. But I it is enraging. However, I would say that I would enjoy to see somebody make a realistic movie based off this story, because I feel like it would piss off like a lot of people.
Maybe
I would
that's why
too.
there wouldn't be a movie of it, but there hasn't been. Yeah.
There hasn't been. Yeah. I
We'd
think
find a way to make a white guy the protagonist of it somehow.
Yeah. I mean, 20 years from now, we're gonna see an amazing like multi-million-dollar Hollywood movie, like about a sympathetic ICE agent, who just like
Oh,
stumbled
God.
into the wrong career or some shit, and he
Or
like,
or what would probably happen is that they do end up making a realistic movie of it, and then like all the anti SJWs get really mad about it.
yeah, it's yeah. I honestly I want to see, I want to see like more real, more real colonial history movies. Can we just get like a Settlers series of
Yeah.
that'd be
Moving
dope.
on the settler colonial period first.
yeah.
That's like saying an honest American, like a film about the American Empire that's honest. Like you're not gonna get those.
Not
Yeah,
while it's
pretty
still
much.
around.
Hey, hold on a second. You're telling me that the Harriet movie wasn't a direct like a true adaptation of her life story?
Yeah, I think that one was pretty accurate.
Look, wasn't, so I have to give it an F minus.
True. Dead man, you cut
Yes.
out, I think. If you were still.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you right now, but I think you cut out a while ago. If you were still talking.
Oh no. I said I was gonna say on the land question, just that like it's very much the case that non-settlers were subject to different forms of violence, and that it was all based on the preservation of the colonies that now came up against their colonial masters, who saw their economic expansion as too quick and an actual problem.
Yeah, definitely. That's a nice summary of it right there. All right, this question brings it to a much more contemporary place, but we could talk about it either in the colonial sense or right now. What issues do both the left and right-wing settlers agree on, and how could that be harmful to the colonized proletariat?
Oh, that's a good question.
Oh boy.
All right, so first off, Palestine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One would probably be the super exploitation of the second and third world, because that is the basis of their economic wealth.
Okay, so just out of curiosity, I mean, like, you said second world, so are you referring to like Vietnam, China, Cuba?
Yeah,
Okay, gotcha.
just anything outside of that specific Western hegemony.
Okay.
Because while there may be some nuances in some regions, that anything outside of the Western core, so the European core, some parts of Eastern Europe, but not mostly, and then European settler colonies, anything outside of that, for the most part, is free territory for free market exploitation.
Right. Yeah, and you don't even have to be there anymore. You can just get the IMF to knock on the door of, those kinds of places, and they'll accept, all kinds of structural adjustment. Unfortunately. But yeah, on the topic of the left and right wing of settlers like agreeing on shit, did you guys see that Joe Biden ad that was like, Donald Trump is soft on China, and that's like bad, and also
Oh,
like,
yeah.
yeah, that shit was wild. It like blew my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, fucking A. I guess too. Like first, like settler leftists really love to like. I should just hell, first world leftists to broaden it out, and far right people, they love to shit on any sort of leadership from like the third world, that has I mean, you look at like anytime that you are just like, oh hey, Castro Castro did some good things, and then you're all of a sudden you're called a tanky and a fucking whatever sympathizer, a dictator sympathizer, authoritarian sympathizer, and like all this shit. And it's just like, trying to talk to them from a perspective of like, look, these people were literally fighting their slave owners. They were literally and that's the dynamic. Like you can't understand that. And I feel like like that mindset is also carried over on the far right, where it's just like, like, oh, just all communist dictators, that's it's the same kind of mind frame, between the two of them, is that you basically like no third world country has a justified leader. They're so quick to find ways to say, oh well, that they weren't good enough, or they twisted the ideology, and they perverted it or something like that.
Well, that feeds into, I think, one thing that we can probably say that, at the very least, both the mainstream and left and right of the settler colonies believes in, and that is the idea this concept where you ensure oh yeah, sure, sure. So bourgeois or liberal democracy, where the settler left and settler right both agree that that is the ideal system, and what that means in practice is where you have competitive party structures again that are what are supposed to establish and ensure rule by the masses. Uh, this concept that, well, if it's a fair fight between Republicans and Democrats, then that's the full scope of potential opinion. And the only way that you can actually call that a democracy is if they are competing against each other and they both have a chance of winning. Uh, third parties don't have to be included in that. Uh, you don't have to have this sense that, well, actually, most people have pretty aligned interests, so therefore, most people actually want the same things out of their government. Uh, and so, what you get is this uh, supposed democracy, which rotating who gets to wear the fanciest hat. Which they
Right.
should make the president wear a fancier hat. Like,
I agree, and maybe a cape as well.
He should have a full outfit, like the American garb, just
yeah,
like dressed to the nines in red, white, and blue.
And a powdered wig.
I mean, I mean, isn't a suit, and then I thought like the suit and the American flag lapel pin. I thought that was the thing. Like you
No,
just...
that's just a code to show that you're on the club. I want like a full blown like American suit. And like I like how Japan has like how Japan has like those mascots. We need that for like an Uncle Sam. Like,
they
Oh,
just
yeah.
the giant
like all presidents when they give their State of the Union address, they have to like have like a huge like red, white, and blue stovepipe hat, and they have to put on like like instead of like putting on like the old time like judge wig, it's just like this like passed down for like the past 200 years of like just like a beard, like just like a white beard that they have to wear like underneath the hat, like.
So no, once God Emperor Trump is no longer a thing, people have to wear like his toupee.
Yeah.
True.
Perfect.
or just like keep his same ill-fitting suit, like just like the same
They have the
untailored suit.
just the White House. Yeah.
Yeah, just like like this is what you have to wear, no matter what your size. Like nope, we're not altering it. Nope, it's not gonna fit you. Like, by the way, I know this is super tangential, but I mean, hey, we're in that pocket. So I don't know what came out recently, but I'm starting to see people like talk about how Trump might try to postpone the United States election, and I just want to say, yo, I said that shit.
That's
wanna-
not gonna. What?
True.
No.
I
Wait.
fucking called that shit.
How is that even possible?
I believe it.
Well, like I said, I haven't been able to find the thing, but I've seen some comments on Facebook and Twitter about how like potentially using COVID as a way to postpone the November elections, which hey, oh, well, we can't have it quite yet in November, but so we'll have it again in maybe June. Oh, you know what? Actually, I'm just gonna sit here. I'm just this now. Hey, how about that? How?
No,
Are we gonna Are we gonna reenact episode 3? We have to like roll in and be like, "You're under arrest. Are you threatening me?"
Are you threatening me? I am going to hurt you.
oh, it's
Yeah.
always the stupidest option. So it'll probably be there's a historical precedent. Election, but there was a whole bunch of questions about it, and the sitting governor, I just declare I won, took the keys to the governor's mansion, locked the guy who probably actually won the election out, and then just spent the next 4 years being governor. So, he can always just take the key codes for the White House and not give it to Joe Biden.
King shit.
Quite literally.
Yeah. No, that's...
Oh shit! Breaking news. I'm sorry, but this is yeah, today's no, not breaking news. My bad. But Italy is now calling. Italy as a whole is now calling for a general strike.
Oh, dope.
Today a general strike is being called out to protest the government's insistence on maintaining business as usual, face a devastating pandemic. There's a workers' revolt from the metallurgic factories of Lombardy to those of from the steelworks of Piombino to the blast furnaces of fuck Italian plants, textile companies, aerospace companies, just basically all of Italy. All these different labor unions and industrial unions are going on a collective strike, standing in the face of 64,000 cases of infection and 7,000 deaths. Half of
kind of early.
half of which occurred last week.
Oh, holy shit.
That must have been from a while back, because Italy's currently at about 200,000 confirmed and 26,000 dead. 27,000.
Kamadots, can you send me the link to whatever you're reading?
Yeah, somebody just sent this to me.
But I mean, it is a good point that Europeans over in Europe are far more willing to go on strike and oppose the interests of capital and all of that which kind of feeds into some of the point that Sakai is making when he is talking about settlers. He's not really even talking about Europeans as a whole for the mindset or for the material. He is very specifically talking about those who have come into territories that are new to Europe and settled them, that had previous like populations there, not like the people of Iceland.
Right. Yeah. And
One thing
go ahead.
one thing I will say is they do, because they are part of the Western hegemony, they do have a specific relationship to capital, so that similar to the settler, not in the same way, but in a very similar way, they benefit from the super exploitation of the second and third world. So there is a push for a socialism, but that it's not one that is based in a global solidarity with the global proletariat. It's also one of the reasons why there is just a history of fascism in Europe post World War One, or going into World War One, but also post World War One.
Yeah. I think like anywhere like around like 1905-ish up until post World War One. But I think like I mean Jay Sakai did talk about the 4 reasons why the United States is the most bourgeois nation like in history, basically, in chapter 1. Which, does anybody remember what they were?
I mean, wasn't it just basically because it was founded by, like,
it was like basically like there's no communal history. It's just like it was founded by the middle class. You know.
It's like the whole United States empire is based on nothing but exploitation. Like
Right.
that's
And
all
primarily,
it is.
yeah, and primarily that of bourgeois persons, which is the one thing that first chapter really brought up, is that the American myth is this idea of like these kind of poor whites who just kind of came over and were trying to make a second life. It's like that's not really true. A lot of them were to
You cut out.
wealthier persons who saw an opportunity to get free land and kind of get their bourgeois. That's specifically a French term to denote middle class. So these are people who aren't so rich that they have the means of control or have the means of production as the basis of their way of life, but they're not so poor that they can't leave Europe. They're not so poor that they are under the boot and heel of capital. So they have enough motion to make these kind of decisions in society the way they do.
Yeah. And I think it's like it's like kind of telling that like the differences that arise, like in which Sakai addresses, I think, in chapter 3, like when he starts talking about like the Irish being like brought in to replace the African laborers, like the African freedmen who basically did everything but, well, shit, I'm then not everything but wipe asses, but I mean they fucking did everything. So we're talking about like blacksmiths and textile workers and foundry worker, all this shit, and like household or fucking household help, hospitality help, all this shit, and then just being able and like creating an environment to completely defang any sort of or creating a whole new class or of what's the word I'm looking for? Like the fuck, what is it called? Du Bois talks about it. That second identity, like that white, being
Double
privileged to
consciousness?
the like the being able to like you're still working a less than humanizing job, or what is considered to be a less than humanizing job, but you get a white man's wage, you know what I mean? Or you get white man's privilege attached to it that like people wouldn't normally get in the in Europe, in Western Europe. So that's why you see a lot of people like Eastern Europeans and people from like Scotland or people from Ireland coming over here to quote unquote find a new life, but it's just it's really not any better. It's just a different form of exploitation that they get to,
Well, it could potentially be better for them, but yeah, I definitely get what you mean. And it really says a lot that, like, black people at this time had, they were enslaved and did, like, all kinds of labor. And then as more and more European immigrants came in, black people were forced down into even more subdivided and more simple labor up until, in, what was it? In like the latter half of the 19th century, like they just chose not to join in strikes because they knew that they would get the shittiest work, and things wouldn't really be that much better.
Exactly. Which also, I think that's an important thing to point to, because I think another part of American mythology is the kind of dichotomy between the North and the South. Um, in a lot of cases, when we think of the South and its exploitation, we just think of slavery in its most brutal aspects. But when we think of free states, they're still in a settler colony. They're still in an empire. So while they might not be slaves, they're effectively the bottom of the capitalist the capitalist system. They're not going to be paid wages in any way equivalent, and there's no reason for the white persons in those free states to care for those black persons. So they were rendered underneath where a slave would have, even though slaves were hyper exploited and all that other stuff. So it wasn't better in any case. And when you have post slavery, now you have this entire class of working black persons who live within the empire, who are by no obligation to be taken care of by the state, and so they just have to be managed. And that's where you get these conflagrations with black communities organized, settlers having to put those communities down because they directly challenge the colony and so on.
Yeah.
100%. If
I would love to have. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just real quick gonna quote Sakai when he says, "The mythology of the white masses pretends that while the evil planter and the London merchant grew fat off the profits of slave labor, the poor white of the South, the northern small farmer, and the white worker were all uninvolved in slavery and benefited not at all from it. The mythology suggests that slavery even lowered the living standard of the whole white masses by supposedly holding down wages and monopolizing vast tracts of farmland. That is distinctly untrue, and I think that Deadman summed up why really well." That's it.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Oh no, I was just agreeing to that. Just the key point that whether enslaved or under the tyranny of capitalism, the black position is one that is very precarious in either circumstance. And post-slavery, where there was no hyper exploitation of them as a slave class, they become this underclass that where any type of labor movement would always put them at the very, very, very back of whatever opportunities there were.
Yep. Facts. So I think by now we should probably get to like final thoughts and then close up. Been at it for a while. So is there anything that anybody wanted to cover apart from what we've already talked about, and anything like that?
No, I'm good.
Okay, cool.
One thing,
Sure.
and this is a kind of big potential topic, but try to keep it relatively short here, is that Simba, you and I were talking a little bit before the string about origins of capitalism, the origin of capitalism, by Ellen Wood, And in that, uh, there's a long historical argument that capitalism develops in cities and out of the bourgeois that we talk about, but that some more recent scholarship, including Woods, argues instead for the original formation of capitalism out of the countryside. And like Wood's argument is primarily about England, but I think that there's a bit of that comes through with some of these origin points for the settler colony, where the key point is that the primary way in which uh, whites are driven is by the need to export in order to keep the colony going. Because as Sakai talked about in the first chapter, uh, this settler colony is never actually self-sufficient. And so you have this economic drive to improve productive forces, which sets up the conditions for capitalism. And whereas in old Europe, you would do this by making a section of the peasantry landless uh, and proletarianizing them. Here, you get to do it by just importing a population wholesale from Africa to achieve the same effect, helping settlers kind of have this mythology of themselves as being a freer place because whites aren't at least as subject to this or only subject to this sort of proletarianization on a temporary basis because you can just export the misery of exploitation and super exploitation to an outside group.
Right.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And I would also add the
Mm-hmm.
right. But no, I just wanted to add onto that just another part of the mythology, just the idea of an open and sparse land, which I mean at this point is not just thoroughly debunked, but like it has a really sinister tone to how the empire and specifically in this early stage of them being colonies, um, how it doesn't address how very visceral the relationship between the settler and the indigenous was. That like it wasn't just the case that the land was empty, but that indigenous people very much populated the land. They knew the land, they had an understanding and a relationship with it, and for the settler, they saw them as a direct problem to their project, to their new world. And so violence against them was inevitable for that reason. And it had nothing to do with the indigenous, but what the settlers were there for, and that their economic expansion was based upon rendering a land full of people empty, and so it had to start empty for that to be the basis of their mindset.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Yep. Okay. So what actually yeah, okay. So what part of this chapter can we relate to what's going on right now? Anybody got any ideas? eventually.
Well, the problems of tactical unity are kind of prominent in an election year.
Yeah, actually. Oh, okay. So, yeah. So, interesting fun fact. Democrats have not won the majority of white people since the signing of the Civil Rights Act in 1964.
Yep.
Yeah. And Democrats are, I mean, overwhelmingly, black people, Latinx folks vote for Democrats, which is interesting. I don't think that they have a lot to offer. And I think that this particular election cycle is yet another example of that. But it makes sense that tactical unity would pop up, I guess. My dogs are going nuts right now. Anybody else got any thoughts?
I'm just looking at it now. The one thing, as far as unity, and it's specifically about the Africans who served and fought for the U.S. Because one thing that people like to mention about the quote American Revolutionary War is the idea that black people died. A black person was the first person killed for the American Revolution. The reality was that there were no gains for Africans whatsoever with that political unity, and that the struggle that they had with the Euro-American hasn't really had any benefit for the new African persons, and I think that's really important to highlight. Just this idea that hundreds of years of trying to assimilate into the American projects hasn't gained benefits for the African person, and not meaningful ones.
Yep, that's a fact. Well, that said, this book, in talking about it, always makes me kind of sad.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just one of those things, though. But that said, I think we should probably wrap up. Everybody, please plug your stuff. Deadman, who are you? Where can people find you? What are you about?
Deadman Animations. I make propaganda. It's spooky. I have a YouTube and a Twitter. That's where you can find my stuff. My most popular thing is Racing Communism, where I talk about the white left being silly. So please go check that out.
Dope. Zabo?
I am Christopher Szabo. I am a anarchist YouTuber, Twitch streamer, and that I'm reading this book because I want to understand settler history, and I want to eventually, hopefully, see the dismantling of the U.S. empire.
Absolutely. Cornbread, who are you?
So I'm Surplus Cornbread, just a dumbass settler on Twitter, where you can find me at Surplus Cornbread 1 because I can't be bothered to change my @. And yeah, I am enjoying these discussions and looking forward to them continuing.
Awesome. Damon?
Yeah, I'm Damon, and you could look me up on Twitch and Twitter at whoisdamon, and you could look me up on YouTube, Damon Garcia, making a lot of videos on liberation theology and leftist politics stuff. And yeah, thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure, dude. Kamazotz?
I'm Kamazotz. And I am one of the chair people on the Horny Left. So if you're interested
Horny
on Maine, please check me out on Twitter at Kamazotz A. So CAMAZOTZA. Just the letter A.
Amazing.
Unfortunately for you, I'm a horny cop infiltrator. Never trust a settler, man.
Ban the
By the-
horny left.
That's
by the
right.
way, by the
Hope you
way,
bring
I
those
changed.
handcuffs.
By the way, I changed my YouTube channel name to Christopher Schuyler Sabo. So if you want to find me, it's called Christopher Schuyler Sabo now.
Oh, okay, cool.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for joining us. Have a good evening. Peace.
There you go.